y'all, I'm Dan Hamilton, Marine Corps veteran and host of the Next Gen Warrior Show. As always, the Next Gen Warrior Show is brought to you by Chairman George P. Bush and our dedicated staff here in Austin, Texas. Today we are joined by Dr. Trillitye Paullin from New York. Dr. Paullin, it's good to have you on the program today. I'm excited to dig into your expertise in science, your military service, as well as being an entrepreneur. And you have a really, I think, incredible platform and incredible background and incredible experience to be able to speak to the military and veterans community about those many different topics. So I'm excited to jump into them today. But tell us a little bit about where you are and how you're doing.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dan, first and foremost, for having me today. It's an honor to get to talk to you and your listeners. And so a little bit about myself. I have a Ph.D. in cellular molecular biology. I'm an Operation Iraqi Freedom veteran and a Pat Tillman scholar, kind of the highlights. I'm also a mommy to two little girls. So my military background is specific to the Army, and I've had many different jobs for the military, and I've served now for 16 years. With the goal of completing my 20 in the National Guard, currently serving in Idaho. Throughout that, I have completed a deployment to Iraq in 2007 to 2008 and several different emergency operations throughout the United States.
So your journey really begins, and Free to Feed really begins as a mother. So talk to us about that and how this journey of soldier and then mom and then entrepreneur. Talk to us about the portion of being a mother and how you really started on this journey to found this company.
So when I was deployed to Iraq, I had the opportunity to experience what it would be like to live as a woman in a third world country. And when I returned from Iraq, I decided that I would take the most of the opportunities afforded to me as a United States citizen and decided that I would pursue an advanced degree, and eventually that ended up being a PhD in cellular molecular biology. I was specializing in cancer research. I truly loved my job, and specific to cancer research, I was looking at protein analysis. How can we analyze and manipulate proteins to help ovarian cancer patients be resusceptible to chemotherapy agents? Pretty cool job. And in my last year of grad school, I became a mom, which was a funny time for us to decide that we were going to start a family. As writing my dissertation, I wouldn't recommend other people do that. And our oldest daughter, June, had awful, what they would call colic. She screamed all of the time, all day, all night. And so we took her in and said, okay, I have broken her. I don't know what I did wrong, but if we could get a refund or an exchange or something, that'd be lovely. And they said, like, yeah, if your baby has colic, she cries a lot, good luck with that. High five, and sent home. And so we continued, and eventually we woke up to find her completely covered in eczema from head to toe with several bloody diapers, one right after another. And it was terrifying. So I took her back in and said, okay, now I definitely broke her.
How old was she at this point too, if you don't mind?
Yeah, she was only 3 weeks old. So she was itty bitty and now bleeding profusely. Said, okay, definitely I did something wrong. Now what do I do? And at that point, we were still really like dismissed, which blew my mind. And then one of the things that was mentioned was it could be that your baby has an allergy, is reacting to proteins transferred from your diet. And my mind was blown. Even as a protein expert, that's what I do for a living. Yep. This was the first time that I'd heard that something that entered my mouth could end up in my boob, and especially that it could cause my baby such an awful response. So they said, yeah, it's probably cow's milk protein, maybe remove that from your diet, and again, sent home. So I did that. I removed cow's milk protein from my diet, and she spiraled. She got very worse very quickly. And before we knew it, we were admitted to the hospital. She was put on a starvation diet, which is a 24-hour, here's a little bit of sugar water to give her every once in a while. I found myself pumping in the stairwell of the hospital and crying because you are the food, right? So you can't like be pumping in the hospital room. That's not nice. I'm bringing in a big juicy steak into a room with somebody that's fasting. Not nice. And it was a really rough time for my family. And at the end of those 24 hours, they said, yeah, it looks like she has a food allergy. So your only option is to switch to a hypoallergenic formula. And the formula was made of corn syrup, smelled like sweaty gym socks, and it was $50 a can. And I could certainly get over the first two things, but the third thing, I was in grad school and I didn't qualify for any kind of assistance for the formula. I tried. And so I ended up going from being a mom who fed my baby something that hurt her to not being able to afford to feed her at all. And that was really rough. And so then I started asking the questions of, okay, technically, if you can make a hypoallergenic formula, can I make a hypoallergenic breast milk? And the answer was, you can, but it'll suck. And I was like, okay, well, I've been in the Army for a long time, so bring on the suck. What does that mean? Let's dive into this. Do this thing. And unfortunately, they didn't have a lot of information for me. They said, here's a list of things you could potentially cut from your diet, and good luck, send home. And I did that. I removed a large portion of my diet, several things out of my diet, and successfully breastfed her for a year like that. And I didn't know any different. I didn't know any better. Just put my head down, got it done. Very, very soldier of me. And
carried out the mission.
I did. And I don't recommend anyone do that today. Don't do as I say, not as I do.
As I do.
And so when my second daughter was born 3 years later, thankfully I was out of grad school this time, but she started presenting with the same exact problems. And at this point, I had the wherewithal to pop my head in the sand and be like, okay, where are the resources and the people and the products and the research on this topic? And I found research on the topic, and all of the research that I found didn't match the things that I'd been told by my medical professionals the first time around. That really had massive impacts on my life for an entire year. So first I was honestly kind of ticked off, right? That like none of the research matched what I was told. Yeah. And then two, that I found so many other families in similar situations with no products and like actual support for them. So I honestly started Free to Feed with the goal of translating the scientific research into digestible content, pun intended, for everyday parents. And at the same time, I was working for a dairy processing facility, which is some irony in all of its forms. So I was literally making millions of pounds of the food that I could not consume while breastfeeding my second daughter. And at that position, I learned that the food manufacturing side has a simple little test that allows you to test cow's milk for cross-contamination of other proteins in the facility, like egg or soy or wheat, if you're running other products in the same equipment. And so I was teaching lab techs how to use this technology, and was like 5 weeks postpartum, had to go to work right away, and was like, oh man, I wonder what happened if I snuck into a closet and squirted some breast milk on this thing. And that was about 3 years ago. So it's a little bit more complicated than that. And that's where my journey led me. I took Free to Feed and morphed it, if you will, into a C Corp, and then started applying for grants to nail down the research that needs to be done in this specific area. And now we're creating a test strip that will allow moms to test their breast milk for the presence of allergens at home.
Does this mean if you have the allergens that, is this a way to decide what you can and cannot eat? And then can the food be reintroduced later into the person's diet and the woman's diet?
Yeah, that's exactly what this is. This is an ingredient deck for the breast that allows you to determine exactly what it is that your infant is reactive to. That way your diet only has to have eliminated from it the things that actually elicit response, as opposed to blanket elimination diets like I did. And then it gives you the opportunity to test your milk anytime that you accidentally consume something, or you purposely consume something. Like, you deserve to sit on the couch and eat a pint of Ben & Jerry's if you want to. And then test your milk to see whether or not anything did enter it. And if so, when is it clear again? And then be able to use the same technology to reintroduce that food, because most of these children will outgrow their food allergies. But navigating that reintroduction is also difficult, as you can imagine. So it does all of those things. So it allows you to determine the culprit, allows you to test subsequent milk for the proteins, allows you to reintroduce, and go backwards in time, because most of these parents will have a milk stash now that they've been working on, because baby will typically present a few weeks into life or even a few months. And then the parents have like this whole freezer full of milk that they've done so much work. It's absolutely priceless. And can I use it? Can I not? Do I have to throw it away? And this will allow them to actually test and know.
So your journey is really interesting because it is so personal, and it's become so professional now. And I was wondering if you could talk about, as we are discussing, you're in a lab And this is where I know you love to be. Before we had this conversation, you just talked about your love of science and your love of biology and chemistry, and understanding how to solve something or create a solution that is so personal to you and is so personal to your child's health. So can you talk to us about how you manage both of those things of those multiple personalities of like wanting to care for yourself, but also having this career and professional interest? Because I think it's probably very rare that I would guess that the people in your field are so personally connected to the professional work they're doing.
Yeah, I will say it's definitely a double-edged sword, right? As many things are. So for me, solving this particular problem is very personal, right? It's incredibly personal. I'm incredibly tapped into this problem. And what's interesting about that is that one, it is a benefit to me because I'm not likely to give up very easily. So I'm a little more stubborn than others because I am literally blood, sweat, and tears has gone into this problem. So where my colleagues who may be in similar situations, most of them haven't experienced the actual problem that they're solving, or the problem that they're solving doesn't have such a high pain point. Where they're still doing incredible things, but you're much further removed from sustainability, for example, or other problems that certainly need to be solved, but don't have that same visceral connection. And so that is a wonderful thing because it keeps me going every single day, keeps me getting out of bed, keeps me coming to the lab, keeps me doing the things that I don't like to do. So coming to the lab is the best part. Talking to parents is the best part. The rest of the stuff I don't actually enjoy. So it keeps me doing those. And then the other side of that sword, though, is that it can blind me, quite frankly, to the best possible next decision. And so, in my mind, when I'm like, just say yes and just push forward, like do whatever's necessary, that's not always the best thing for the company strategically. And so I've really focused on surrounding myself with the people who know better. The people who aren't as connected to the problem and have a higher level view of it and can say like, oh yeah, no, these terms stink, right? Like don't take this money or don't do this research study or whatever partnership comes about, because there's a lot of opportunities, and being able to parse out what is a good opportunity and less than a good opportunity can be difficult when you're so close to the problem.
Yeah, so the third side of this equation, or this experience, if you want, that you just referred to, is the business side, right? So you have the experience as a mother, this incredibly visceral experience. You professionally come up with a solution or begin to try to find a solution in the lab. And then the third aspect to it, the third side of it, is then the business side, where you have to go out and pitch this idea. You almost have to pitch yourself as the founder of a company to say, hey, I can do this. And I'm interested, if you don't mind, to dive into that a little bit as you reference it. What do you like about the business side, raising money, creating a business plan, marketing and stuff? What do you like about it? And then what has maybe been the most difficult for you to adapt to?
Yeah, so I will say that I have a learning mentality, right? I have an open mind learning mentality. So that part I enjoy. I enjoy like learning. I have learned so much over the last 3 years about starting a company, right? Starting a biotech startup, which is its own monster in and of itself, and not something that I'd ever planned to do. That was not my goal in any way, shape, or form.
What was your goal? Do you mind if I ask you, before you had children, was there a different path you were going down?
Yeah, I wanted to be a cancer researcher, and my entire goal, I was going to focus on a cure for cancer, and specifically was focused on ovarian cancer.
And now you find yourself raising money, you find yourself writing a business plan, you find yourself trying to market this idea, and even probably just working with friends, right? To see if this product that you've created, this solution that you're trying to bring to market, will work, and it will help people around you, as well as mothers and families across the United States and around the world. So tell us about, again, if you don't mind me going back to that, what you enjoy about the business side of it, and maybe some, as I said, some things that have taken a little bit longer on the learning curve.
Yeah, so I think my favorite part is how we've been able to truly take the customer discovery side of things. So one of the things that I learned is all about customer discovery and talking to customers and really getting their feedback and being able to ask them questions in a way that doesn't bias my own agenda, if you will, of like, this is what they want. So learning that was really fascinating, and getting to talk to parents was my favorite thing, right? I just absolutely adore these families that are in the trenches, right? They're like living and breathing this problem right now. And the longer that I'm in this, doing this entire mission, like the further away I get from the problem, right? So my youngest is now 3, and we finished breastfeeding when around the age of 1. So I'm 2 years removed from breastfeeding with food allergies. So that's been one of the pieces that I truly enjoy. I really enjoy talking to my customers, and that allowed me to lean into that and actually create a product before our product is at market, right? So we have a free to feed subscription now that's available that literally teaches parents everything they need to know about navigating this journey. And so the subscription offers them educational modules. It offers them one-on-one personal consults with their breast friend. And it provides them a community, right? Like a community of other parents who are living and breathing it right now to ask questions and get support and empathy and love. So that part and watching that community grow is by far my favorite. My least favorite has been pitching in investors and fundraising. I hate it. If I could be just super honest, it's my least favorite thing in the whole wide world. I'd rather go have my toenails ripped off one by one. So the reason is because one, when you're fundraising, you're talking about a boatload of money, right? Like more money than like my brain in another time would even be able to like conceive, right. Really. And that's coming from somebody who has not had money growing up. So like going to other people who have a lot of money and saying, I'm raising $1.5 million. Like that, like my brain can't even put that. Right? What does that even look like? Yeah. Or joking with my husband about having like 2 commas, right? Like, what does that mean?
You that and you ask for that, you're like, wow, this is so foreign. Like, how did I get myself in the middle of this?
Oh yeah, what is even happening right now? Yeah. And then the other side of that is being a female with a woman-based problem in the biotech startup world, or really just the entrepreneurial world in general. So what's interesting is that
a very male-dominated segment, or science in general, as well as the people, the VCs or the companies they're going to raise money from, right? So you're trying to kind of break that barrier, break that almost communication problem, or the fact that these some of these men may not have the same experience that you have, and you're trying to show them the reality of the situation, right?
Yeah, and so that's exactly what I'm up against, and what I've been up against for a few years now is how, what's interesting, and like to put into perspective, is that close to half of startups in general, not necessarily biotech, it's a little bit less in biotech, but close to half of all startups are founded by females, which is wonderful, and it's growing, which is great. And in recent years, a total of 2% of all venture funds have gone to female-led companies.
Wow.
So when we make up half of the market, and 2% of funds are going to us, which is egregious. And so it makes you think, like, why, right? Like, why is that the case? And the research around this really, points to the fact that most VCs, most venture capitalists are males. And so the communication is different, the understanding is different. And certainly for me, there's an extra obstacle of they have likely not lactated and are a pretty long ways from this problem. And so to explain to them how important this problem is, and to truly like make a connection with them, because that's what it's all about, right? In order for someone to give up their money, they have to connect to the problem. And it's really hard to get somebody who has frankly useless nipples to connect to my nipple problem. And that's hard. So learning how to do that, learning how to have grace in the midst of that has been difficult. And the extra layer on top of all of it is the fact that I'm a veteran. And so veterans also historically struggle to raise money as well. And I think that what that indicates is that there's that gap between the civilian world to the military world, and how we communicate, and how, you know, we're hardwired, a lot of us. And so it's just an extra like layer that I'm dealing with. I'm learning, I'm learning a lot. And a big portion of it for me as I've grown into the space is understanding that that's okay, that's okay, that people aren't going to understand, and to move on. So instead of belaboring the opportunities that didn't come because people can't understand this problem, going where people might, right? Going where like I have a better chance that people will understand this problem. And luckily that is improving slowly over time, but it's certainly hard. It's really hard not to, you know, chuck my computer across the room at the next, you know, venture capitalist that tells me that this won't work because moms don't care, or, you know, just off the wall crap.
So we are recording this on June 21st, and tomorrow, June 22nd, is IndieBio demo day. It's a life science accelerator in New York, where you are in New York right now. And I wanted to ask you, as what is the advice that you would give yourself as you're on the doorstep of this big day 2 years ago? What would you tell yourself during, you know, at the beginning of this process and throughout this process?
Oh, I think the advice that I would give myself 2 years ago, you know, and as I've navigated this process, is to learn to trust myself, to learn to trust my my gut, which is so ironic because that's literally like my bread and butter of what I'm telling parents every single day, like really trust your instincts, really like lean into that. But for me, what's been really hard is that I am a subject matter expert in the things that I'm a subject matter expert in, and I find comfort in that. And so in my journey, what I've found, unfortunately, is that for this areas that I don't feel as strongly educated, right, like starting a business, I have found myself lacking the confidence to lean into my instincts. And so I'm learning. I have you know, professional help now with that, to lean into that, and understand that by surrounding myself with the people who do have that expertise, and then leaning into my instincts, that's led to bigger and better things for the company, and being open and honest about it, right? Like not having an ego wrapped up in the fact that like I am a scientist and that is okay, and that, you know, giving myself grace along the way. So certainly not being able to lean into my instincts, even if they're like flashing for me, has proven some difficulties.
Can you take us back to the first iteration of this product and maybe some of the difficulties that you ran into, and in the how you got through that?
Yeah, so there's so many difficulties. There's been a lot of obstacles. I would say some of the biggest obstacles that I run into in building the product itself has been the lack of research, frankly, in this field. And not to belabor the issue, but as a women-based problem, there's less funding in this particular issue. And so really understanding like how is it, an interesting question to pose, how is it that like the number one nutrient source that we all live on, even for like a short period of time when we're first born, how is it like that foundation isn't well studied, right? Like how? And as we know more about it, we're like, oh wow, this stuff's pretty flippin' cool, and now we can make medicine out of it and all this other like really cool, amazing things. But how is it that we got to 2021 and no one knows? It's just a giant mystery, wonderful blob that creates this liquid that keeps humans alive all by itself for months on end, and like no one's thought to be like, oh, maybe we should look at that stuff, maybe we should see what's going on there. And that's been a really big obstacle, right? To like have to paw through decades of research and then have to deal with all of the misinformation around that. Because when you have a sparsely researched topic, that means that the misinformation around it is vast, right? So Unfortunately, one of the big things we're up against is a lot of misinformation about transferability from your diet to your breast milk, timing for that, and all the little nuances, because the research money, frankly, doesn't go there. And so thankfully, that's something that we're closing down on, and we're answering the actual questions that like real parents really want to know about their breast. Why not tell them?
What's been the reception from other mothers when you talk to them about this?
Oh man, they're banging down my door. They can't wait for this to be a market. I can't wait either. So as I've talked to parents and families about this, to say like, you know, this is our plan. To be frank, the first like kind of iteration of the product wasn't going to be a test strip. It wasn't until I talked to lots of families, because in my mind, I'm a scientist. I want my own little lab, and I want people to send their breast milk to me, and it'll be amazing. That's not actually going to help this problem for a number of reasons. So after I talked to many parents, and they were like, no, I just want to be able to test it at home and know, and taking that feedback and running with it. I think that the hard part today is that I can't just go to market tomorrow, right? Because I need to raise money, and I need there's more research that needs to be done, and regulatory pathways, and a bunch of other boxes to check that we have to complete before we can go to market. Because otherwise I would be on the street corner right now, like passing them out.
How do you think your military service has contributed or been a negative factor on you as a business owner?
So I think there's been both, right? And I think that's fair to talk about both sides. So on the positive side of thing, as a business owner, it's been incredible to still be in the military and have medical insurance, right? So that's been huge. The fact that I'm a biotech startup and I can save a boatload by not having to get my own health insurance, that's wonderful. And then definitely the benefits that I receive as far as just my leadership training, my background, everything that has led to my ability to lead other people. And I think the Army has played a really big role in that. So that I appreciate. Certainly there are aspects of that that don't translate as well as we'd like to the civilian sector. So I will caveat that there's a limit to how wonderful that can be, and definitely need to get additional training and beefing that up as you get into it.
Out some of the rough parts, huh?
Yeah, you can't make your secretary do push-ups or anything like that. So not that I have a secretary, but someday if I do, I will try not to make her do push-ups. So important to know, and that has been super beneficial and powerful for me. But there's certainly been some downsides. One being that having to juggle both, and both isn't even the right word, all, right? There's more than two. Having to juggle them together has been really hard. One of the things that is important to note is that I'm a staff sergeant. And so I have a Ph.D. I've been in for 16 years, and I am a staff sergeant because I can't be amazing at both at the same time. And so it leapfrogs. So I can be amazing at one or the other, but I can't do both. And so it's taken a lot of humility for me to be okay with that, to say like, I don't have the time to go to officer candidate school. I don't have the time to go to my leadership school right now to get my E7. I that's on the docket, right? It's scheduled. But being able to juggle both and being amazing at both, is it possible? And so that's been hard. It's been hard for me to put on my uniform and know that like, I should probably be an officer. I should be higher than an E6. I should be killing it in the military. And I'm not, because if we have a drill weekend and they don't have something very specific for us to do, I'm in my car working, right? Like while everyone else is, sitting around the motor pool, playing on Facebook, like I've got meetings and with investors in my uniform, like I got stuff to do. Whereas if that weren't the case, I would probably be, doing other things and bringing on additional duties and helping in more ways than I do currently. And having the grace to say like, I'm okay that those two things can't exist together.
Yeah, I mean, that's an incredible, I think it takes a tremendous amount of humility too, to be able to say that, because that's one thing maybe on the show we don't talk enough about. And one of the phrases that I love is you have to give up the good in order to get the great. And I think that's kind of what you identified there, right? Is like veterans need to know that if they're pursuing more than one thing at a time, if you want to be a subject matter expert, that some areas, it's not that they don't fall by the wayside, right? But if you want to be great at one thing, you have to really focus on that. And that occasionally means not having to excel at both. But I just think your ability to acknowledge that and say, hey, I'm going to put most of my eggs in this basket is really great to hear. But I want to ask you, if you hadn't put all of your eggs into that basket and really wanted to say like, hey, I'm going to dedicate myself to this business or to science, do you think you would have dedicated, your entire career to being in the military? And what have you enjoyed about being in the military that has actually kept you serving for 16 years?
Yeah, so if I hadn't found, such a intense connection to science and eventually this business, I definitely would have leaned more into my military service and my career in the military, specifically because of the family that it's provided me. So I've had a really rough upbringing. And so I joined the military when I was 17 for the ability to go to college, the ability to have true family no matter where I went. And that was, what the recruiter sold me on. And I was like, hell yeah, let's do this thing. That sounds wonderful. And that's why I stayed in, right? Is that that's true. And the many times that I've moved for different reasons, no matter where I go, I have a military family, right? I have not only in my National Guard service and having a unit and plugging into it immediately and all of that, but also as a veteran, right? So I'm highly involved in the veteran nonprofit space, volunteering. That's what I do for fun. Is I love to volunteer with my family in the veteran space, and so I would have leaned into that specific to the family vibe and atmosphere that it really gives you that I frankly didn't have as much of as I was growing up.
When did your love of science start?
Oh man, middle school. So I had a middle school teacher named Mr. Bates, who was an amazing scientist and truly loved what he did. He just loved it in a deep level. And I fell in love with that. I was like, that's incredible. I want to do that. I want to be as excited about something as that man is. And so as I learned more in the same time frame, my mom had been diagnosed with ovarian cancer. And so I experienced her going through chemotherapy and treatment and surgery and all of those things. And she did survive, which is rare for that disease. And I have a higher chance of eventually having ovarian cancer. My children do as well. It is a genetic disease. And so for me, that happening at the same time, it was a perfect storm for me to say oh wow, I really love this. And when I got back from Iraq, so I finished school, I do basic training and all that. I deployed to Iraq very early in my college career. When I got back, I was offered a position in a research lab researching leukemia. And the professor's name was Dr. Heidi Super. She's a absolute badass, and the only name that's cooler than Dr. Trill.
Yeah, that's awesome. I was going to say, you have a pretty great name too. I think you might be able to give her a run for money. I mean, we're here in Austin, but definitely in Houston, Trill is, that's where that originated from. But anyways.
Yep. And so I'm going to start my rap career next. That's what I'm going to do after I retire.
That's start my rap career.
Yep. Okay. So with that, she had offered me a position working in her lab, and I fell in love. I was like, yep, this is it. I love it. I love working in the lab. I love doing something that brings me so much fulfillment, and also really is catered to my personality. And then I leaned into that as I pushed forward in my career.
We've covered a lot of ground today. The last thing I want to ask you about is you briefly mentioned that you and your family do a lot of work in the community within, with military organizations. And if I'm correct, that's with the Mission Continues. And I just kind of wanted to hear what that means to you and what you guys enjoy doing.
Yeah, had the opportunity when I was in grad school to be accepted into the Pat Tillman Foundation. And I was accepted as a scholar, 2014 scholar. And the first time that I ever went to the Leadership Summit that they hold every year, they had a collaborative service project with the Mission Continues. And that was the first time that I had heard of them, done anything with them. And we totally renovated an entire park in Chicago, just like hundreds of veterans doing badass stuff together and getting dirty and, you know, high-fiving. And I was like, this is my jam. Like, I love this. This is great. And when I got home, at the time I was living in Tampa, Florida. So I got home and there was a platoon. They called them platoons, the pods or groups in the Mission Continues. There was a platoon in Tampa and I was like, yeah, this is great. And I also had June around that time, my oldest. So June has literally grown up in the Mission Continues, as has Rose, our second. Our very first service project with the Mission Continues, I was like 700 months pregnant, I'm pretty sure. I like gardening and my belly just like out to like Orlando. It was nuts. And so it truly enjoyed the fact that with the Mission Continues, I can bring my family, right? So it's this really inclusive community where it's in your community, right? I'm actually doing stuff for like my people and my neighbors, and I can bring my kids with me and they're all having a good time. And so when we moved from Tampa to Boise, Idaho, Boise didn't have a platoon for the Mission Continues. And so I started harassing the Mission Continues. I was like, hey guys, like this needs to happen. We need to be in Boise. You guys need to come to Boise. I'm missing this connection with my fellow veterans. And eventually they said yes, with the caveat of it's going to be a grassroots platoon and you're going to build it. And I was like,
what?
Okay. So at the same exact time, I just had Rose, just had our second, was Free to Feed, was beginning to build as well, or just starting as an idea. And so I said yes to this opportunity to start a grassroots platoon in Boise, Idaho. And I was terrified. But the Treasure Valley really just swooped its arms around the Mission Continues in Boise. We raised tens of thousands of dollars. We have renovated entire buildings and built gardens, and it's just been a badass experience that my kids got to be a part of and my husband. And then I got to pass it on. So I did that for 2 years. We did dozens of projects that really had a massive impact on mostly the schools. So our focus was on education. And then I got to pass it on to another veteran. And when I'm home, I actually was home last month, got to go to some other projects with the kids, right? And so it's really amazing to see something that my family, there was a lot of sacrifice, there's a lot of work that went into it. I literally had to buy myself a truck because to make this happen.
Haul stuff around.
Right, yeah, exactly, because we're building buildings and stuff. Yeah. And I truly love doing things with my hands, building things. It's very much like science, actually.
Yeah, interesting. It's an interesting connection. I wouldn't have put the lab and then outdoor community service kind of in the same mindset, but you're right, it is very similar.
Yeah, super, super similar. And so now it's so incredible to see it take off and be able to just bring my family to a thing that we created, and now it's going to have lasting impact.
Well, I want to thank you just for your incredible work in the community, as well as building, a company that is going to help mothers and young children and family, across the United States. And I wish you nothing but the best of luck. I know tomorrow's a big day for you, and this will air after you go out for demo day. But this is a really incredible story. I appreciate you sharing us your journey, your professional journey, and your love of the military as well. We've got the opportunity to cover a lot of ground with you today, but is there anything that you would like to leave our audience with?
Yeah, so first I want to say thank you, Dan, for having me. It's an honor and a pleasure to get to chat with you and deep dive into this journey, this craziness. I would love, first and foremost, if there's anyone interested in learning more about Free to Feed, you can find us at freetofeed.com or on any of the social media platforms. Certainly check out our Instagram. You can watch a scientist dance to booby facts. I don't know who would want to miss that. So definitely check us out there. And then I want to say to your listeners that wherever you are in your journey right now, you're doing an amazing job, and being okay in whatever you have accomplished today is impactful and powerful. And certainly wherever you are, you're a badass, you're doing incredible, and we're rooting for you.
Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes this episode of Next Gen Warrior. Dr. Trillitye Paullin, thank you so much for being our guest. It is incredible to hear your story. And like I said, we wish you nothing but the best of luck and hope to have you back on to continue this conversation and to see where the business goes. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
On behalf of Chairman George P. Bush and our dedicated staff of the Texas Veterans Land Board, we will be back here next week. Please share, like, and comment at Voices of Vets to share the incredible stories like Dr. Paullins here on Next Gen Warrior. Until then, we'll see you next time.
Follow us on Instagram at Voices of Vets, on Twitter at Voice of Veterans, and on Facebook at facebook.com/Voices of Veterans. To hear more, please visit voicesofveterans.org. Join us in sharing the success stories of Texas veterans. Thank you for joining us for the Next Gen Warrior podcast.